As we settle into the silence, let your thoughts go back over the course of the week just concluded. And see what images or memories come to mind of times when someone offered caring to you. Perhaps something as simple as a smile or holding open a door. Perhaps something more significant, like helping you resolve a problem, listening to a story you needed to tell. Where has someone offered caring to you this week? Whether we recognize it or not, every moment, always, we are held together in a network of mutuality. Amen. I begin with a poem by Israeli poet Yehuda Amichai. From the place where we are right, flowers will never grow in the spring. The place where we are right is hard and trampled like a yard. But doubts and loves dig up the world like a mow, a plow. And a whisper will be heard in the place where the ruined house once stood. What does it take to finally stop you from continuing as you have been, to realize you've been wrong, to face a moment where something, probably you, has to change? We sometimes call those experiences of hitting a wall or hitting bottom or hitting our limits. We go along choosing the direction of our lives, maybe ignoring warning signs that something is off. We keep going, and then one day keeping going is no longer possible. What has unfolded within us and around us cannot stand, cannot just continue. Collectively, such a moment comes when injustice is so awful, so shameful, so terribly, tragically clear that we can no longer just watch and turn aside and shrug and complain to all the people who already agree with us. The wrong is too great to bear. Individually, such a moment comes when a relationship ends because too much is wrong or trust is broken beyond repair, or when a career path puts us in a morally compromising position and we have to refuse to go along, or when someone we love tells us we are no longer the person they thought we were. Things can get too wrong to endure. Now, our culture encourages us never to be wrong, and if we are wrong, by all means, don't admit it. Perfectionism is our central value, and anything less than that gets a quick condemnation. Even when our behavior or our circumstances are too obviously wrong for us to pretend otherwise, so that we have to admit we've been wrong, we still are advised to find ways to avoid that admission, to make excuses, keep insisting, well, we actually are right, change the subject, point fingers of blame elsewhere. We get ongoing education in how to do this, sadly, from our national leaders. To be absolutely, incontrovertibly wrong is unthinkable, a moment from which one never recovers. Yet for all our insistence on being right, no matter what, as Amacai's poem notes, from the place where we are right, flowers will never grow. Because being right means nothing changes and new life never comes. Throughout the month of January, we've been delving into the topic of authority, central to our understanding of what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist, and also problematic to our understanding of what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist. Our spiritual path sets a premium on individual authority, placing ultimate responsibility for discerning truth, outlining values, and living in accordance with that truth and those values on the shoulders of each one of us. One wonderful result of that perspective is a kind of energy and creativity and accomplishment that our tradition has brought to lives and communities, to our work in the world and our work within our churches. Yet the focus on the individual as central, on the single person as holding ultimate authority, has brought challenges, most of which we have not yet figured out how to resolve. The challenges show up in our uneven ways of living as a spiritual community, where individual authorities inevitably clash, and we have no good way of untangling those clashing authorities. Conflict will always enter into any group of people, so a group needs processes for addressing that conflict. In our congregations, we do write covenants, most of which are too long, as ours is here. Filled with all sorts of aspirations that don't belong in a covenant, because a covenant is strictly just about how we, all of us in this congregation, will live together within the walls of this church. And our covenants tend to be forgotten, tend to be neglected, especially when we most need them, when conflict erupts. And covenants, by and large, still carry a strong sense of individual perspective, setting the individual as ultimate authority. So if everyone has equal and final authority, how do we decide which authority to listen to? What should I say or do when my authority and your authority don't agree? Is there really no supreme authority that we turn to? We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote journeying toward spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. For some time now, that proposed addition to our long-established 7 principles, called the 8th principle, has been under discussion in many congregations as part of an overall effort to have us collectively adopt it and add it to the existing principles. Perhaps not surprisingly, one of the frequent objections to the 8th principle is its reference to accountability. As we promise, because a covenant is a promise, as we promise that we would be working and acting in ways for which we would be held accountable. Accountability is a sticking point because of our insistence on individual ultimate authority. Who is charged with holding us accountable, and who gave them the right to take that position? Any talk of accountability seems to push back at individual authority, to suggest that it is somehow trumped by some undefined larger authority, and that doesn't sit well with us, is even at times called un-Unitarian. Yet we desperately need accountability in our anti-racism work above all. because the work is so great, and because it requires us to see what we've not seen before, since we are embedded within the system. I need you to hold me accountable for what I cannot see. You need me to hold you accountable for what you cannot see. The anti-racist work we're challenged to do now, along with work we already do in terms of the injustices we see around us, is to learn how to see what we have not seen before within our own hearts, to see so much that we take for granted if we are white people in our white-centered culture. Many spiritual traditions talk of insight and wisdom as a way of seeing deeply and fully, and present it in the form of stories that involve inability to see and a restored vision, or images of being in shadows and stepping into light. It seems we don't come into the world naturally able to see accurately, which may be why one of the most frequently repeated urgings of parents with young children is the urging to look there, look at that. Then later, as though in anticipation of how seeing all around could be challenging for a child, we start teaching our children not to see. Insist that gazing too long is staring and that's rude. So we learn how to see selectively, more and more influenced by our subjective experiences and cultural norms, seeing less and less of what is around us, seeing in ways that tend to reinforce what we already know and believe, and not seeing what might upend our expectations or upend our entire world. Churches of all kinds combine seeing right with knowing what is right and true, and accompany this perspective with a denunciation of how terrible it is not to see right and therefore not to have the truth. Those traditions that invite their followers to undertake acts of confession make it clear that one knows the truth, but either disregards it or misunderstands it, and as a consequence engages in wrong actions. Once clear seeing and understanding returns, a pivot from wrongness back onto the right path can occur. Our own Unitarian Universalist tradition dances around this dynamic. As we decline to define truth and make it subjective, and even at times seem to encourage keeping it private, because if I walk around speaking my truth, somehow I'm infringing on your autonomy or implying that I'm superior to you. This inevitably compromises our capacity for knowing how and when to hold each other accountable, since doing so means admitting somebody or something was wrong. And that has seemed to imply a judgment about another's inherent worth and dignity that we refuse to make. So our own path of accountability has been a fitful one, as we alternately denounce societal wrongdoing, all the while trying to avoid denouncing the wrongdoing of each other. But if we never call one another to account, if you never call me to account, and I'm discouraged from calling you to account, that keeps us standing in the place where we are right, where flowers never grow and nothing ever changes. In my personal anti-racist work, I've spent some time reviewing experiences of racial differences over the course of my life journey. That review has meant repeatedly realizing that what I saw was not the entirety of the event, or what I saw was so shaped by unconscious bias that an utterly different meaning unfolds when that bias is accounted for. Much like those magic eye pictures, where you look at it from one direction and see one picture, but soften or shift your gaze and you see a different picture. I'm discovering that especially where race is concerned, some of the events of my life can look startlingly different, depending on whether my eyes are fixed inside the lens of dominant culture, or whether I've shifted my seeing to a wider focus, a deeper consideration where more than the frame of dominant culture is involved. I know what I did, I know what I heard, I know what I saw. Shift my perspective, and the very same words and gestures and actions, none of them changed in the slightest, carry a completely different meaning. For instance, a key memory I hold in terms of my early experiences with race comes from the year my small-town public school finally integrated, and I came to class that first day to see a black boy, only one, since this was the advanced class, and one can only imagine how limited historically black schools in that small town had been in terms of providing chances for black students to grow into being academically advanced. But I noticed how that boy seemed so frightened, hunched over his desk, because I was a good kid, wanted to be a good kid, because I also believed I had some empathy for his feeling of being alone. I walked over to take a seat next to him. I introduced myself in a friendly tone, made typical first day of school small talk with him. I could see he was not feeling any better, despite my efforts, but I concluded it was just too overwhelming getting used to a new school and new people. Today I look back at that incident with some beginnings of understanding of what people of color experience living in a white supremacist culture, and I see that event very differently. For I know now that black males have to learn early on in order to survive how dangerous it can be for them to look at, much less talk to, white females. Probably that boy had already been warned against those encounters. Perhaps he had already heard horrific stories of what happens to black males if they interact with white females. Small wonder that my sitting next to him and talking to him did not console him, because he was experiencing not friendliness, but a dire threat. I saw myself as being a good person. I did not know how to see things from his perspective because I had no knowledge of that perspective. This is how the magic eye of anti-racism works. As a white person in a white-dominated culture, I start out seeing the world and myself in ways defined by that culture, and I see people of color in ways defined by that same culture. What I need to learn, however, in order to live more fully as an anti-racist is how to see the world from something other than just a white perspective. And even more, to recognize the absolute stark differences of those perspectives. Differences that have to be understood if we are to be effective allies, and differences that can never be waved away under the comfortable assumption that, well, we all want the same thing. Keeping that magic eye focus on my experience holds me accountable in new ways. And it is showing me, as I see even in that first encounter with that boy, how again and again and again I've been wrong. Wrong not because I'm a bad person, just as I was not being a bad kid in approaching that boy, but wrong because the whole system, the system of which I am a part, is terribly, cruelly wrong, is a system that is intended to always advance my interest and never advance that boy's interests. How do you understand the stories from your experience that involve race? What is the full vision of your journey? And where can you look at your journey from another angle, like a magic eye picture? We put so much emphasis on being right and never being wrong. How does that emphasis impact your understanding of your story, your accountability for what you've done or not done, said or not said, who you've loved or not loved? How important is it for you to be right? Because no matter how carefully, earnestly we try, all of us are wrong at times, often terribly wrong. And we bear the scars to show it on our bodies, on our hearts, on our souls. Our church community, the wider community, our Unitarian Universalist tradition, all the elements that make up our lives have been wrong, despite earnest efforts to avoid wrong and do only right. An old-fashioned concept in some Western spiritual traditions that doesn't show up much anymore outside the Southern Bible Belt is the concept of conviction. In a spiritual sense, conviction is an awareness of being wrong, an awareness that comes with a sense of guilt. Conviction is distinguished from condemnation because it is not accompanied by harsh judgment or feelings of shame. Rather, to be convicted, which is how the expression usually appears, as one says, I feel convicted, or I felt convicted. To be convicted comes with an understanding that change is necessary and confidence that change can happen. Conviction in this sense is also attributed to the mysterious workings of the Spirit, which enables a person to see how they've been wrong and also to see the way forward from that place of being wrong. Our anti-racist work, if we do it open-heartedly, again and again brings us to experiences of conviction where we see what we did not first see, where the bigger picture emerges and we understand just how wrong we have been so long as our seeing was limited to seeing through the window of a white-centered culture. As we see more, see deeper, we allow the feeling of conviction to deepen and the recognition of wrongness to intensify, but in that process we are being transformed into people who see with understanding, with humility, with a readiness for change. Instead of standing in the place where we were confident of being right, the place where our lives are hardened and no flowers bloom, we step into standing in the place of doubt, of recognition of wrongs, the place where the world can be dug up and new seeds planted. May we be ever more willing to be held accountable, to be wrong, and then willing to change. May it be so. Amen.